All right, you guys, here we are. Aslan and the witch just had their private talk, right? And it ended with a giant roar from Aslan and the witch running away, which is awesome. But they had a private talk. We didn't know what they said. So all we know is that Edmund was somehow released from the witch's side, right? But that had to break some deep magic. So how was that going to happen? What was Aslan going to do? Let's see if we can find out. This chapter is called The Triumph of the Witch. This might be a little sad, guys, just so you know. As soon as the witch had gone, Aslan said, "We must move from this place at once. It will be wanted for other purposes. We shall encamp tonight at the fords of Bernuna." Of course, everyone was dying to ask him how he had arranged matters with the witch, but his face was stern, and everyone's ears were still ringing with the sound of his roar, and so nobody dared. So Aslan, the sweet thing about Aslan is he's always good, but he doesn't always look safe, right? And so he could still look stern, he could still look fierce, but he's always good. After a meal which was taken in the open air of the hilltop, for the sun had gotten strong by now and dried the grass, they were busy for a while, taking the pavilion down and packing things up. Before 2 o'clock they were on the march and set off on a northeasterly direction, walking up at an easy pace, for they had not far to go. During the first part of their journey, Aslan explained to Peter his plan of campaign. So this is Aslan going, "Okay, Peter, you're in charge." As soon as she finished her business in these parts, he said, that was the witch he's talking about, "the witch and her crew will almost certainly fall back to her house and prepare for the siege. You may or may not be able to cut her off and prevent her from reaching it." When he went to the outline the two plans of battle, one for fighting the witch and her people in the wood, and the other for assaulting her castle. And all the time he was advising Peter of how to conduct the operation, saying things like, "You must put your centaurs in such and such a place, or you must put scouts to see that she doesn't do this or that." So here's Aslan. Think about that. It's like, have you ever had your mom or dad say, "Now you need to do it this way, or you need to do it that way"? This is Aslan telling Peter, "Put these people in front, put this here, make sure you always do that." He's giving him all this advice. And what's Peter's response? "But you'll be there yourself, Aslan." And Aslan says, "I can give you no promise of that." Uh-oh. And he continued giving Peter more instructions. For the last part of the journey, it was Susan and Lucy who saw most of Aslan. He did not talk very much and seemed to them to be sad. It was still afternoon, and they came down to a place where the river valley had widened out and the river was broad and shallow. This was the fords, and Aslan gave orders to halt on his side of the water. But Peter said, "Wouldn't it be better to camp on the far side, for fear she would try a night attack or anything?" So Peter already kind of taking charge, thinking his own way. Aslan, who seemed to have been thinking about something else, roused himself up with a shake of his magnificent mane and said, "What's that, Peter?" And he said it all over again. "No," said Aslan in a dull voice, as if it didn't matter. "No, she will not make an attack tonight." I wonder how he knew that. And then he sighed deeply. But presently he added, "All the same, it was well thought of." That was nice. Even though he's super sad, he said, "All the same, it was a good idea, Peter." That is how a soldier ought to think, but it doesn't really matter, so they proceeded to pitch their camp. Aslan's mood affected everyone that evening. Peter was feeling uncomfortable, too, at the idea of fighting a battle on his own. The news that Aslan might not be there had come as a great shock to him. Supper that evening was a quiet meal. Everyone felt how different it had been last night or even that morning. It was as if the good times, having just begun, were already drawing to their end. This feeling affected Susan so much that she couldn't get to sleep when she went to bed. And after she had laid down counting sheep and turning over and over, she heard Lucy give a long sigh and just turn over beside her in the darkness. "Can't you sleep either?" said Susan. "No," said Lucy. "I thought you were asleep." "I say, Susan, what? I've the most horrible feeling, as if something were hanging over us." "Have you? Because as a matter of fact, so do I." "Something about Aslan," said Lucy. "Either some dreadful thing is going to happen to him, or something dreadful that he's going to have to do." "There's been something wrong with him all afternoon," said Susan. "Lucy, what was that he said about not being with us at the battle? You don't think he could be stealing away and leaving us tonight, do you?" "Where is he now?" said Lucy. "Is he here in the pavilion?" "I don't think so," said Susan. "Let's go outside and have a look around. We might see him." "All right, let's," said Susan. "We might just as well be doing that as lying here awake." So both girls, they couldn't sleep, and they started thinking, wait, Aslan has been very sad and different. I wonder, is he leaving now? So let's go find him. Very quietly, the two girls groped their way among all the other sleepers and crept out of the tent. The moonlight was bright, and everything was quite still except for the noise of the river chattering over the stones. Then Susan suddenly caught Lucy's arm and said, "Look, on the far side of the campground, just where the trees began, they saw the lion slowly walking away from them into the wood. Without a word, they both followed him. He led them up a steep slope out of the river valley, and then slightly to the right, apparently by the very same route which they had used that afternoon in coming from the hill of the stone table. On and on he led them into the dark shadows and out into pale moonlight. Getting their feet wet with the heavy dew, he looked somehow different from Aslan they knew. His tail and his head hung low, and he walked slowly, as if he were very, very tired. Then, when they were crossing the wide open place where there were no shadows for them to hide in, he stopped and looked around. It was no good trying to run away, so they came toward him. When they were closer, he said, "Oh, children, children, why are you following me?" "We couldn't sleep," said Lucy, "and we felt sure that you needed to say no more." And Aslan knew all they had been thinking. So Lucy and Susan were like, "We couldn't sleep." And he's like, "Need say no more." He knew exactly what they were thinking. "Please, may we come with you, wherever you're going?" asked Susan. "Well," said Aslan, and he seemed to be thinking. Then he said, "I should be glad for the company tonight. Yes, you may come if you will promise to stop when I tell you. And after that, leave me and go alone." "Oh, thank you, and we will," said the two girls. Forward they went on again, and one of the girls walked on each side of the lion. But how slowly he walked! And his great royal head drooped so far that his nose nearly touched the grass. Presently he stumbled and gave a low moan. "Aslan, dear Aslan," said Lucy, "what is wrong? Can't you tell us?" "Are you ill, dear Aslan?" asked Susie. "No," said Aslan, "I am sad and lonely. Lay your hands on my mane so that I could feel you were there, and let us walk like that." And so the girls did what they would never have dared do without his permission, but what they had longed to do ever since they first saw him. They buried their cold hands in the beautiful sea of fur and stroked it, and in so doing walked with him, and presently they saw that they were going with him up the slope of the hill on which the stone table stood. They went up at the side where the trees came furthest up, and when they got to the last tree, it was one that they had some bushes about it, and Aslan stopped and said, "Oh, children, children, here you must stop, and whatever happens, do not let yourselves be seen. Farewell." So Aslan had walked with them, and the girls, they walked on either side, and they just put their hands in his mane and walked slowly and slowly with him. And he was so sad. Something was going to happen. He was so sad. And finally they got to the place, and he said, "This is where you stop." And they hid in some bushes. And that's where he said, "Farewell." And this is where we will say farewell for tonight. And tomorrow I will read what happens. All right. Good night. Farewell.